Get ready for your daily dose of WordPress and web development tips, tricks, and insights to help you find success with WordPress. You're listening to WP the Podcast with your hosts, David Blackman and Tim Streifler.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of WP the Podcast. I'm David Blackman.
And I'm Tim Streifler.
Today in episode 615, we're going to talk about shared hosting versus VPS or virtual private server and dedicated server. So we're all the rave about hosting today. And Tim, why don't you let us know the difference between those three options?
Yeah, absolutely. So shared hosting is probably the most common hosting, most popular hosting, and it can be okay for really small websites where you don't need anything specific or particular. And so shared hosting is essentially a server, and the hosting company will cram typically hundreds of websites on one server. And so it's called shared because you're sharing that server space with hundreds of other sites, and you're also sharing those resources. So the bandwidth, the storage, all the other things, server resources that are a part of hosting. So it's all shared. Now, VPS stands for Virtual Private Server, and a virtual private server it's one server that's partitioned and segmented into separate areas. And so even though you're technically sharing the server with other websites, you have a guaranteed allotment of resources that aren't affected by other websites on the server. And so it's called a virtual private server because of that fact. So it's kind of like a server within a server. And then dedicated server is you have literally the entire server to yourself. There's no one else on it. You have the entire server, all the storage, all the bandwidth, all the resources, everything is completely yours. And so those are kind of the three main differences. There's also cloud servers, cloud hosting, which we'll save for another episode. But shared hosting, VPS, and dedicated are the three most common different hosting environments.
Awesome. What are some of the cons and pros of going with each? And we're going to start with shared, since that was the first one that Tim defined and stuff. And one of the cons of shared hosting is I'm going to go with the potential to be hacked. You know, I'm going to let you do noisy neighbor and stuff, Tim, because you talk about that really well. So one of the downsides of, you can be the best, most efficient WordPresser in the world. You can be doing everything 100% correct. You can be backing up your website, making it secure, changing your permalinks and your slugs to make sure you're not using admin as your username, and just going on WordPress best practices. The downside is in a shared environment, because you're sharing all of those resources and you're on one server, you're only as secure and good as your neighbor, the person that's right next to you. So even though you're doing everything by the book and correct, you can still be potentially vulnerable to being hacked. Because let's say Jim Bob got his first WordPress website and he set it up and he doesn't know, and it's just fun for him. He's looking for the most inexpensive hosting, which is typically shared, and he just throws his website on there, and then guess what? He leaves it alone and forgets about it and says, you know what? I'm not doing that anymore. I'm hunting now, or I'm fishing, and my website's over there. Well, WordPress is updating, plugins are updating, but Jim Bob's site's not getting updated. There's a big security vulnerability that comes out, and next thing you know, you're vulnerable. So shared can be kind of risky. That's one of the biggest cons, is you're only as secure as the other websites on your server.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've fallen victim to that. I did everything right on shared hosting, and I got hacked because, as David mentioned, you're only as secure as the other sites on your server. So if there's 100 websites, that means only one out of those 99 need to be infected to infect you and everyone else there. And I've fallen victim to that multiple times on cheap shared hosting, and I'll never go back because of that. So yeah, David alluded to the noisy neighbor issue, which is another major con of shared hosting. And just like you're only as secure as the other sites on your website. You're only as fast as the other websites will let you be. And what I mean by that is you might have a server that has a decent amount of resources, and in general, it's typically pretty fast and everything seems to be running pretty smooth. But if all of a sudden one of the websites on that server has the Oprah effect, right, or the Shark Tank effect, where they're getting national or international
recognition,
yeah, there we go. All of a sudden, their website just gets blasted and is getting a ton of traffic, and now all of a sudden it's using up all the resources on that server, so now you're not getting anything. And so in the server space, they refer to that as the noisy neighbor issue, because you have a neighbor on the site that is taking up all the bandwidth and it affects you. And so you even though you only need a small amount of resources, if another site or several other sites are using up a ton, it's going to take it away from you. And so it's shared server space. It's also shared resources. So that's a major con.
Yeah, and I know that it looks really appealing, the price points, because as you go up, virtual private servers typically a little bit more expensive than shared. And even as you scale up to the dedicated side, obviously, think about it, a hosting company has 100 clients on one server versus only one person on that server. They have to be able to justify the cost of the server and stuff. So obviously it's going to be much more expensive. Now, I'm of the adage of you get what you pay for. Yeah. And I like Tim, started out in shared hosting. I had a Bluehost reseller account. As a matter of fact, I still have it. I'm grandfathered in. Bluehost discontinued reseller accounts in, I want to say it was 2014, so like 6 years ago. They quit it. However, they allowed you to keep your reseller account because they had unlimited sites, unlimited whatever for $30 a month. I mean, come on. Unlimited is a misnomer. It's not a truth. There is no such thing as true unlimited. There's resources are limited and stuff. So they did away with it, but I kept it, and I started on shared, and then I moved to VPS with A2 hosting several years ago, and it worked really well for us. But as our company and business and traffic continued to grow, we ultimately ended up, with dedicated servers, and I know Tim has a similar story. And I'll never go back. The cost, justifies, what we're getting and stuff. It is more expensive, but it's quite a bit more expensive. Dedicated is a lot more expensive. And in order to justify a dedicated server, you really need to have like a high traffic e-commerce website or making enough money to justify that. So I think we have currently between 5 and 7 dedicated servers now, which is kind of crazy. But it's just where our business has scaled and stuff. So,
yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I would say, cause we talked about the pros and cons of each. Most of the cons are related to shared hosting. I would say the con for dedicated is the cost, as you alluded to, David. However, if you can justify it, it is more than worth it. So like David said, if it's a high traffic e-commerce site, well, you're making money with your website. You better believe that it's going to be worth it. And same thing, if you have a ton of clients and you want to put your clients on your dedicated server and your clients are paying you maintenance and hosting fees, okay, well, again, it's going to more than pay for it. But if you just, have a personal blog or something like that and you don't get a ton of traffic, it's more of a hobby, well, don't buy a dedicated server just because it's the best. It's just a waste of money.
All right, Tim, I think, have we covered shared, VPS, and dedicated sufficiently enough?
I think so. One thing I will add is we're going to talk about in the next episode managed WordPress hosting, and so stay tuned for that. And we'll definitely compare kind of what we're talking about today, traditional hosting versus managed. But I would say kind of the winner of shared hosting versus VPS versus dedicated kind of the all-around winner, I would say, is VPS, because you get guaranteed resources. It's a server within a server. You don't have the noisy neighbor, the sideway hacks, and all of those types of things that you do with shared hosting, but it's also a lot more affordable than dedicated.
Absolutely.
So if you want a winner, that's one I would say is the winner.
Unless you have a high-traffic e-commerce website.
Correct.
Go dedicated.
Exactly.
Bite the bullet. Don't cheap out. Tim and I talk about this all the time. If you're serious about your business, you really need to be serious about your hosting. Hosting is the foundation. It's the most important thing in your business. So, yeah. You're smiling, Tim. You're laughing.
I'm laughing because I don't know if I should say this publicly on the episode, David, but David's company is coming out with hosting. They're building their own hosting company. Hope that's okay to say publicly, David.
Yeah. Absolutely. We've technically launched it. It's in beta. So it's specifically geared towards the Divi theme. Obviously, Tim and I are big WordPress guys, but we're heavily entrenched in the Divi community, and that's kind of where we started, and we create products for it. So it just kind of made logical sense for us to, go ahead and start a Divi hosting company, but it's WordPress as a whole. So if you have a WordPress website and you want a great host, come check us out, divispace.com. So, yeah.
And the reason why I was smiling, David, is I think that what you just said, which is one of your catchphrases, we both have our certain catchphrases of things we say a lot, whether it's on here or in Divi Chat or in our course. One of the things that David says, that's one of his catchphrases, is if you're serious about your business, you need to be serious about your hosting, which I think you need to put on a shirt with your new Divi hosting logo by DiviSpace, or whatever the name is.
That's a great idea, man. That's a great idea. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, well, thanks. All right, well, tomorrow, like Tim said, we've got another great episode. 616, Managed WordPress Hosting versus traditional hosting. We're going to give you the pros and cons and hopefully help you figure out which one might be best for you. So be sure to join us tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow.
Take care. Bye-bye.
We've come to the end of today's episode of WP the Podcast. Join us tomorrow for more daily tips and strategies designed to help you run your WordPress business toward success. Remember to subscribe to WP the Podcast so you can stay up to date with each episode. And don't forget to rate and review us. We'll see you again tomorrow right here on WP the Podcast.